Hello and welcome to this short video on the stories and histories of Dundrum Bay, produced for Northern Ireland European Heritage Open Days 2020. My name is Sharon Arbuthnot, and this video is part of a project of the Electronic Dictionary of the Irish Language known as Spreading the Words. Dundrum Bay is a marine estuary in County Down, Northern Ireland. The town itself is probably best known today for its impressive ruins of a Norman castle begun in the early 13th century. Around the time that the mainly French-speaking Normans were making a castle, the Irish were remaking a tale which centred on the inner part of Dundrum Bay. Dundrum Bay has an unusual feature in that the inner and outer bay are divided by a sandbank. In fact, the inner bay is termed a loch in Irish. Medieval tradition holds that the bay was formed around 300 years after the biblical flood, when water burst through the ground and drowned a man named Rudraige. So the inner bay became known as Loch Rudraige or Rudraige's Loch, and that name still appeared in Irish language geography books well into the 20th century. The tale that we're interested in today, though, features a different character. Fergus MacLeta, who is said to have been king of a population group in the northeast of Ireland called the Ullaith. An early version of the tale, composed perhaps around the 7th or 8th century, tells how Fergus once fell asleep by the coast. While he was asleep, tiny beings carried him out of his chariot into the sea. Fergus woke up and his feet touched the cold water, and he caught 3 of these little beings, one in each hand and one in his chest. They negotiated with him that he would spare them if they granted him 3 wishes. In response to one of his wishes, they gave him herbs to put in his ears so that he could go under water. But they told him that the herbs wouldn't work in Loch Rudraige. And as with so many medieval Irish tales, that qualification sets up a scenario wherein Fergus does try to use the herbs to go under Loch Rudraige. While there, he meets a sea monster, and he's so terrified of it as his mouth contorts in a look of horror that remains permanently frozen on his face. When he comes out of the water, he asks the charioteer how he looks. The charioteer tells him that it's nothing that a good sleep won't put right. And so Fergus sleeps, while the charioteer consults with the king's circle on what should be done. They conclude that Fergus should always have his face washed while lying on his back so that he won't see his reflection. And he lived like that for 7 years, until one day he thought his maid was too slow in washing his face. He hit her with a whip, she taunted him about the condition of his face, and he cut her in 2. Fergus did return to Dundrum Bay, though, to get revenge on the sea monster. For a day and a night the water seethed as he fought the sea monster, and eventually Fergus emerged with its head and died on the spot. Around the 13th century, a much longer and more comical story was built around the same basic plot. There were some changes in detail. In this version, Fergus is made aware that his face is deformed during a row with his wife. To go into the bay, he puts on a pair of shoes which he has taken from one of the tiny creatures, and we have a far more gory account of Fergus's death. He emerges from the loch with the monster's heart, but is mortally wounded himself. His skin is said to have as many holes as a sieve. The literary impact of Fergus's adventures in Dundrum Bay didn't necessarily end with this 13th century remake, though. It's been suggested that the image of Fergus, with the tiny beings in each hand and on his chest, was the inspiration for the island inhabitants of Lilliput in Jonathan Swift's 18th century novel Gulliver's Travels. The inhabitants of Lilliput are described as being less than 6 inches tall, and the beings whom Fergus encounters are truly diminutive. He can catch them in his hand, and in the later version of the story one of them falls into his drink and almost drowns. They are identified in the tales as leprechauns. Whoever came up with that term might have based it on the early Irish words lu, meaning a small thing, and corp, meaning a body. In medieval times there was a great variety of ways of spelling that word, including leprechauns and leprechaun, and of course these are the terms that we find anglicised as leprechaun. In the early version of the tale they are also called avig, which is related to the Welsh word for a beaver. Avik are often associated with water in early Irish texts. In fact, an early work which explains the meanings and derivations of words claims that an avik is a little thing that lives in rivers. It may be no surprise then that Fergus came upon these tiny creatures lurking round Loch Rudraige. Fergus's adventure is a tale of extremes though. The tiny leprechaun creatures contrast with the enormous sea beast. The later version of the tale describes it as 150 foot high, with 150 legs on each side and a hooked claw at the end of each leg, with huge teeth, a wide mouth and a neck that curved into an arch as big as a rainbow. Although the early tale doesn't give detail about what the sea creature looked like, it does tell us that the beast kept inflating and contracting like a smith's bellows. That idea of the monster inflating and contracting may reflect an attempt to explain the tides that are seen in the bay, to explain why the water advances and retreats. It's clear at any rate that the authors of the tales about Loch Rudraige attribute the movement of the water to the behaviour of the monster that resided in the bay and to the commotion of the battle between the monster and Fergus. A combination of currents, wind and the sandbank can produce extreme white water in Dundrum Bay. It certainly proved to be a dangerous place over the centuries. The annals record that in the early 10th century a fleet of Vikings drowned in Loch Rudraige. The annals of the Four Masters puts their number at 1200, though the annals of Ulster suggests that in excess of 900 Norsemen died that day. Little wonder then that the turbulence of the bay caught the attention of some early Irish scholar, who imagined that what was seen on the surface was the effect of a mighty tussle between man and monster happening under the water.